ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय जन्माद्यस्य यतो अन्वयादितरतश्च अर्थेषु अभिज्ञस्वराट् तेने ब्रह्महृदाय आदिकवये मुह्यन्ति यत्सूरयः तेजो वारिमृदां यथा विनिमयो यत्र त्रिसर्गो मृषा धाम्ना स्वेन सदा निरस्तकुहकं सत्यं परं धीमहि निगमकल्पतरोर्गलितं फलं शुकमुखादमृतद्रवसंयुतं पिबत भागवतं रसमालयं मुहुरहो रसिका भुवि भावुकाः. We now enter the 5th chapter of the 11th Skandha of Bhagavatam. So this is the concluding chapter of the discourse of the 9 sages as narrated by Narada. So we saw that Narada is responding to Vasudeva, who asked a question about the supreme truth and how to realize it. So Narada related a discourse by the 9 sages, also called Navayogi Upakhyanam, which they gave to the King Nimi. So we have seen so far 7 of the sages reply already. So the last 2 are remaining. So Nimi asks 2 questions to each of them. First, he asks the question about what is the fate of those who do not follow the way of surrendering to the Supreme Lord and whose mind is uncontrolled. So Chamasa, this is the next Rishi, Chamasa replies that by the Lord's arrangement there are 4 Varnas and 4 Ashramas. We have seen this described many times before. The 4 Varnas are Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. Varna means color, which is more like the frequency of one's way of living, the description of one's way of living. That's why Varnan means description in Sanskrit. So the description of the 4 ways of living is according to one's propensities and actions. Karma, guna karma vibhagasha, as Krishna says in the Gita. So according to one's propensities and one's actions, the 4 types of varnas are given, and the 4 ashramas are brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha and sannyasa. That is the student life, the householder life, the life of a retired, and the life of a recluse or a renunciate. So he says that this is the way the creation is made, and the whole purpose of all of this, what is common to all of this, is to recognize that the Supreme Lord is the indwelling ruler and controller of all. If one doesn't recognize it, then one is wasting one's life, especially if one is reading the Vedas and yet gets misguided by them, then one surely wastes one's life. So what he describes here is how Vedas have many portions which describe karma kanda, that is various rituals and their fruits. If one gets attached to those, Krishna himself calls in the Gita the flowery words of Vedas. So these flowery words, if one reads them and doesn't understand their inner meaning or their true purpose and gets lost in them, then he gets deluded. So he says, those who study the Vedas, they have to be careful to not be misguided and thereby get deluded, because if they do not know the secret behind these rituals, these actions, then they become learned and they become scholars, but they become also conceited and proud in their scholarship, and they indulge in very fine talk, but they don't live in wisdom. They're still dominated by desire and anger and so on. They are so drawn to sex, and they are so drawn to generally enjoying pleasures, and they may even perform all the Vedic sacrifices, but they don't actually follow any of the true spirit of all these sacrifices. They get blinded with pride out of their learning and out of their strength and all the rest, and they thereby, instead of becoming more humble, they become more proud by learning all the scriptures and so on. and they do not therefore get the essence of the Vedas, which is to recognize, just as the sky is present everywhere, all pervading, it is the Supreme Lord who is all pervading as the self of all. To recognize this is the purpose of studying Vedas. But there are those who study Vedas and become scholars and lose the very purpose of it, and they are drawn towards sexual pleasure, towards eating, towards alcohol, and so on, all kinds of vices. So all of this is found today as well, and in those times as well, clearly. So that's why this Rishi Chamasa says that such people, they waste their lives and thereby they enter a dark place. That is, their life is filled with darkness even now because of this addiction to pleasures and thereby constantly chasing them. And therefore, he says, those who use their wealth only for their comfort and their gratification, they are their own enemy. They don't understand the essence of religion, and they live simply for enjoyment, and they are ignorant of true dharma, and thereby they live in pettiness. And not only that, they hate others many times without recognizing that in others too dwells the same Supreme Lord, and thereby they end up hating the Supreme Lord by hating others. Because if we recognize the truth that it's the one Supreme Being pervading all, then to hate anyone is to hate the Supreme Lord. And therefore, without recognizing this, they hate others, and therefore they do not have the true knowledge of self, and thereby they have no peace. They live in ignorance, and they are frustrated, and eventually time devours them as death. So this is the fate of those who are not understanding the spirit of Vedas. Even worse, when they actually study the Vedas and only become scholarly and proud. And of course, those who do not get exposed to this wisdom and who are caught in sense gratification, they also suffer a similar fate. Now, finally, King Nimi asks the last question to the last sage. He says, it is said there are 4 ages. As we know, we have seen this many times before: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Kali Yuga. So he says, in these 4 yugas, 4 ages, what are the various forms of the Lord and how is he worshipped? So the last sage, his name is Karabhajana. Karabhajana replies, saying, Keshava, the Supreme Lord, appears in each of the 4 ages in different colors, forms, and so on. In Satya Yuga, he appears in whitish complexion with 4 arms and matted locks, and he is worshipped with equanimity. Men in general of that age are calm. They have no feeling of animosity towards anyone. They live with an eye of equal vision, and thereby they see the Lord in everyone and everything. So this is the highest state. It is called Satya Yuga, literally the age of truth. So this is the beginning age, it is said. And then it devolves into Treta Yuga, which is the age where it is said that the Lord is seen as reddish in color, and he is wearing golden locks, and he is worshipped as sacrifice. So here the principle is yajna. So because the direct perception is not there like Satya Yuga, in Treta Yuga there is a lot of sacrifices, yajnas, fire sacrifices that are done. And these fire sacrifices are done by pious men, and through that they worship the Supreme Lord as Vishnu, as Yajna, and so on. Whereas in Satya Yuga it was said that he is worshipped as Purusha, Avyakta, Ishvara, Paramatma. All these names are pure recognition of the Supreme Self. Avyakta means the one who is beyond all personalities, all forms. Paramatma, the Supreme Self. Purusha, the Supreme Being. So in Satya Yuga, in the age of truth, he is seen directly as the all-pervading, indwelling Supreme Spirit. In the Treta Yuga, he is seen as Yajna, or the principle of sacrifice, as Vishnu. In Dwapara Yuga, he is seen as Krishna, of course. He is seen with darkish complexion, wearing yellow silk. He is wearing Kaustubha gem and all the beautiful ornaments, and he is seen as the ultimate reality in the form of Krishna. So worshipping Krishna is what came in Dwapara Yuga. The prayer that is said there is Namaste Vasudevaya Namas Sankarshanaya Cha Pradyumnaya Aniruddhaya Tubhyam Bhagavate Namaha. So I offer my obeisances to Vasudeva, to Balaram who is Sankarshana, to Pradyumna and Aniruddha. Then they say Narayanaya Rishaye Purushaya Mahatmane Vishveshwaraya Vishwaya Sarvabhutatmane Namaha. You are the Supreme Being Narayana who has come in the form of the greatest sage Narayana too, as Narayana. You are the Lord of the universe, the very universe itself, and the self of all beings. So in this way, they worship Vasudeva or Krishna with Balaram as Narayana in Dwapara Yuga, and thereby they adore and praise the Lord and worship Him. And then finally in Kali Yuga, it is said that He is worshipped in a beautiful form which is bright and which is worshipped through simply the chanting of the names. So that is why Sankirtana is considered the Kali Yuga Dharma. That is the way of worshipping the Lord in Kali Yuga is through Sankirtana. It says, Yajnair Sankirtana Prayair Yajantihi Sumedhasaha. So through the process of Sankirtana, that is the congregational chanting of the holy names of the Supreme Lord, He is worshipped by singing His praises, and people worship Him saying, O protector of all devotees, O Supreme Lord, I bow to your lotus feet. You are the abode of all sacred places, the shelter of all. I bow down to you. So in this way, they offer worship to the Supreme Lord in Kali Yuga through Sankirtana, through congregational chanting. And then he concludes, this Rishi Karabhajana concludes by saying, interestingly, that of all the four yugas, each of which having a different form of the Lord and different way of worship, the most discerning people find that Kali Yuga is actually the best counterintuitively, because in Kali Yuga he is accessible simply through the names. By simply chanting the holy names of the Lord, he is accessible. Therefore, it is said that there is no higher gain than chanting of his names. It says, Kalim sabhajayanti arya gunagnya sarabhaginaha yatra sankirtanena iva sarva swarto abhilabhyate. So everything is attained through simply sankirtana, congregational chanting, which is the easiest process. And therefore, he says Kali Yuga is actually the best in its own way, where people attain the perfect peace by chanting his names and thereby end all suffering. So he says, in this Kali Yuga, everyone is devoted to Narayana through the chanting of the holy names. And very interestingly, he says, especially so in the Dravida territory. So Dravida territory is the southern peninsula of Bharat, where the three oceans meet. And it says here, where the rivers Tamraparani, Kritamala, which is Vaigai, and the sacred Kaveri, where all these rivers flow, there is a lot of devotees of the Lord. It says, Kaveri cha Mahapunya, Pratichi cha Mahanadi, Ye Pibanti Jalam Tasam Manuja Manujeshwaraha, Prayo Bhakta Bhagavati Vasudeva Amala Shayaha. So it says here, those who live on the banks of Kaveri, Tamraparani, and so on, they are especially devoted to the Lord Vasudeva, and they have no other object of worship. They don't follow any other procedures, spirits, or deities, but simply surrender to the Supreme Lord Vasudeva, who takes care of them fully. So in this way, Karabhajana too completes his discourse of the four ages, and especially the greatness of Kali Yuga, where he is worshipped simply through the holy names and the chanting of them. So another point there is the reason why South India is mentioned here is because that is where the entire bhakti movement started eventually, with all the great saints writing such beautiful poetry glorifying the Supreme Being. So that is what is prophesied here by saying it will be in the southern peninsula that the movement of bhakti devotion will flower in Kali Yuga. So with this, Karabhajana concludes his discourse. So Narada now completes by saying, "Thus you have heard the discourse to Nimi by the nine sages." And after giving this discourse, the nine sages left while everyone looked at them with great gratitude. And then the king also attained the highest goal. So he concludes by saying, "O Vasudeva, just as the king attained the highest goal by listening to that discourse, now that you've also listened to this discourse full of faith, you too shall attain the highest goal. As it is, you are most blessed because you are the parents of Krishna himself." So he's addressing both Vasudeva and Devaki and says, "You both have given birth to Krishna in this life. He has chosen to appear as your son, and you have been blessed with parental love for him, by which you've been purified every moment." And we know that even his enemies, such as Sishupala, Shalva, Kamsa, Poundraka, all of them, just because of their enmity with which they were constantly thinking of Krishna all the time, even that enmity liberated them. Then what to speak of you and Devaki, who are both so devoted to him? Just know that Krishna is the universal soul, the supreme Lord, who is simply appearing in human form to bewilder all. His purpose is to remove the burden of earth, protect the virtuous, and most importantly, bestow grace by which people will be liberated. So, in this way, Narada concludes his discourse now to Vasudeva, revealing the true essence of Krishna or Vasudeva. So, hearing this, the great Vasudeva and Devaki, they were both extremely pleased. And even though they have been revealed the divinity of Krishna along with Balaram many times and they tend to forget it, now Narada has left a deep imprint in their hearts, and therefore they are both completely overcome with love and they are completely feeling blessed. In this way, Narada has blessed Vasudeva and Devaki, and then he departs, and Vasudeva and Devaki are so happy. So with this chapter concludes, and Shuka Brahma Rishi says that this discourse that has been narrated, the nine sages, Navayogi Upakhyanam, the great discourse by the nine sages to Nimi, which was in turn related to Vasudeva, the one who listens to this nine sages discourse, his delusion is removed and he becomes ready for the supreme wisdom. With this chapter ends. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.